Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Dominic. I'm going to present assessing anonymity techniques employed in German court decisions. It's a de-anonymization experiment. This is joint work with Keuchen and Nicolas Christin. Courts must publish all their court decisions, and the reason is that the public, meaning us, have an interest in that for reasons of accountability and to predict our behavior, because court decisions, they not only specify the law, but depending on the jurisdiction, also constitute the law. On the other hand, there are a lot of persons involved in this decision. We distinguish natural and legal persons, where you can think of legal persons as companies. And the interest and the data of those persons in the decisions, they must be protected. So in Germany and also in the European Union, this is typically done via anonymization. However, the notion of anonymity in the anonymization of court decisions is different from the one you know, the typical technical one. So typically a technical definition is that the anonymity of a person means that the person is not identifiable within a group of persons, also referred to as the anonymity set. However, now the legal notion employed by German case law is that the person is not identifiable by an attacker employing reasonable effort in terms of time, costs, and labor. And this thought is also underlying the GDPR. What does this mean now? So if we look at a person that is not anonymous from a technical perspective, we need to look at the effort to see if the legal and the technical definition match. If the effort was reasonable, then they match. However, if the effort was unreasonable, the person might be deemed anonymous in a legal sense. And I will come back to that difference because it's underlying our experiment. Now, let me give you an example of how such a court decision might look like. We have Professor Dr. Olivia Burns here. She's a professor of information security at the Friedrich-Alexander-Universität Erlangen-Nürnberg. And she was scheduled to fly from Berlin to Los Angeles on August 8 because she wanted to attend USENIX on boarding of Lufthansa flight 1337. However, that day, several climate protests took place in the German capital, and climate activist Noah Green glued himself to the runway, causing the flight to be cancelled. So Olivia Burns is not here today, unfortunately. This case is obviously made up, but it might resemble the statement of facts that you can find in a court decision. Now, how do courts anonymize this information here? We distinguish three different techniques. The first one is omission, meaning that up to all characters of the information string are omitted. In the case of 1337, you see there's a full omission. The next one is suppression, meaning that you replace the string, any substring or character with a neutral expression. So for example, here in the 1337 case, again, we have the 2 stars at the end. Finally, we have tagging. Tagging means you replace the string or any substring with an expression describing the type of information. So for example, for Olivia Burns, we have a first name and a last name. We further distinguish whether these techniques are partially preserving or non-preserving, meaning in the partially preserving case that information of the original string is preserved. So for omission, this is clear because only in the case where you fully omit, nothing is preserved, and in all other cases, you typically preserve information. For suppression, in the case of PQ, you preserve that the string consists of 2 substrings. Same holds for tagging in that case. Now, if we apply these techniques to the decision, it might look something like that. So we have Professor Dr. OB. She's a professor at the university, was scheduled to fly from A to B, and the Lufthansa flight now became the company flight. There's also the climate activist Noah Green that turned into C. As you can see from this decision, there's a lot of information that is not anonymized in that. And that might be the points where you could target the decision. So, for example, if we know that OB is a professor of information security, we could look at the USENIX conference page or the attendance list or also the university webpage to figure out how many professors of information security start with OB. And it might be just one. Now, when we were looking through German court decisions, we noticed that a lot of decisions look like that. So we had the feeling they might be de-anonymizable, which led to the following research questions. So we were interested in which of these anonymization techniques were vulnerable, which publicly available sources facilitate the de-anonymization. So, for example, the web pages or the university pages. And finally, which insights into this concept of reasonable effort can these de-anonymization attacks provide? The thing is, because of this legal definition and the reasonable effort, we need to de-anonymize in order to figure out which effort we used and to argue that it was indeed reasonable. So what have we done? We recruited 54 law students and presented them with 50 randomly selected the court decisions and asked them to de-anonymize them only with the help of the internet. The participants had 35 minutes per decision, and we recruited them for a total of 3 hours, so every participant could at least cover 4 court decisions. The experimental interface looked like that. The students were presented with 2 screens. The left one was the experiment interface, where they were guided through the experiment and could report their results. And the second one was the Chrome browser, where we had a browser extension installed to keep track of timings, and also the decision was displayed on this monitor. Now, we collected a lot of data in this experiment interface, and the first I want to talk about is potential de-anonymizations. So if the students find something, they were reporting what they thought was the original information, and they needed to give or report their confidence on a 6-point Likert scale. And if this confidence was greater than 3, we said this is a potential de-anonymization because the students were confident in it. They also needed to give a justification why they thought this would be the right answer, and also need to give a source. And I will talk about the sources in a minute. Now, what we needed to do is, because we had no access to the original court decision, was we needed to employ a verification procedure to see if the students were actually right. And in this verification procedure, we needed to find justifications such as legal arguments, geographic exclusivity, or unique inference to see if we can confirm what the students found. And I will give you a few examples later. And then we needed to categorize the sources, and this is what I will show you next. So here you can see all the sources the students reported were fueling their de-anonymizations, and I will highlight a few of them. So the first 2 are news and personal pages. An example of a news page could be articles stating that Noah Green glued himself on the runway that day. An example of a personal page we already saw is that we can find a professor of information security on the university page or the USENIX page. I also want to highlight that 15% of these sources were other court decisions or the attack decision itself. And we have an example of that again. We were saying that OB was scheduled to fly from A to B, and in the next sentence it says that climate protests took place in the German capital. So we already know that A must be Berlin. If we move our attention to effort, we need to talk about the time, cost, and labor that we employed. So the average attack, meaning one student attacking one decision, took 33 minutes and cost €7 as we paid the legal minimum wage at the time of the experiment. The students were 3rd-year law students on average. They only had experience in reading court decisions, but they have not yet graduated. So arguably, the effort that was employed in this experiment was minimal. But if it was minimal, it was also reasonable, which is why the following results are not only de-anonymizations in a technical, but also in a legal sense. So if we look at our 50 court decisions, we had 484 anonymized strings in those decisions, and where anonymized string meaning any unique appearance of anonymized information in the decision. 184 of them were potentially de-anonymized. And in 120 cases, we could actually come up with justification and confirm the results of the participants. If we move our attention now to the techniques, we see the following, where PP stands for the partially preserving technique and NP for the non-preserving one. The omission partially preserving, so essentially using initials, performed the worst. While we see here that it was roughly 1/4 of all attackable strings, the initials were 40% of the potential de-anonymizations and even 45% of the confirmed de-anonymizations. If we move to the non-preserving counterparts of the techniques, we see that they outperform their preserving ones, because you can see this the most clear at omission and suppression non-preserving, because there the share of the attackable strings down to the confirmed de-anonymization almost halves. So to conclude, we saw that the anonymization practice is highly insufficient but improvable. The courts should use non-preserving techniques, especially they should not use initials. They should have more consistent anonymization, not only within one court decision, but also between different court decisions, and ideally also between the media. And finally, they should anonymize much more, especially because we saw that all techniques, even those that are information theoretically secure, are still vulnerable. And this is how you can get in contact, and now I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.